Hello.
Hi everyone. I'm just going to add my moderator as well. 1 second, and then we will get going. Let's see. I don't remember where I go to do this. This is going to be fun to rewatch. There we go. Okay.
I know Instagram really needs to make it so that like when you post a live as a reel at the end, you can cut out this whole
Right.
like, are you there?
Staring
Am
at the
I there?
screen.
Can everybody
Yeah.
see my like I'm like cut out the first 3 minutes just automatically. It's never what you want.
Yeah. Whenever I put a recording up and like I see it in the feed and it's just me like staring at the camera.
Yeah.
Anyways, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Kristina. I'm really excited to have you here for our second monthly buyer seller hotline, and I'm thrilled that Sarah is joining us. Sarah's from Dwelling on the
Yeah, ring
Pass.
ring.
Yeah, hello. We should have like old school
I
DJ
know, like
soundtrack, I
those,
think.
yeah.
So I will let Sarah introduce herself in a couple minutes, but first I want to, say hi to everybody here. I'm going to just open up my thing so I can see more people. And it's your space to chat, right? So this is a place where you can talk to each other in the comments. You can share insights. You can ask questions. You can talk about your different perspectives on what's happening in this world, the secondhand vintage and antiques world. And we're bringing buyers and sellers together on this call so that we can better understand each other, talk about challenges, expectations, ideas, all that stuff. And there's a big thing that's kind of affecting everybody right now, so we're gonna get to that. If you're here for the tariffs, we will be talking about tariffs in about 15 or 20 minutes. We're gonna start a little bit with the thing that we had planned to talk about
The
tonight.
other bee
Yeah,
in our
ease in a little
bonnet.
bit to the
Yeah.
big discussion. So absolutely drop your thoughts. Say hi in the comments. I'd love to know where you are joining us from tonight. If you want to say hi, if you're feeling very chatty and you want to hop on with Sarah and me, just drop a phone emoji and I can invite you to be one of these little squares if you want to. So if you want to tell me as well if you're a seller or a collector, feel free. A little bit about me if you don't know me. I'm Kristina. I'm the publisher of The Vintage Seeker, and that is an independent media source for vintage buyers and sellers. And I launched it in April 2021. I've been publishing for almost 20 years and creating content for niche communities just like this. I am not a seller, but I'm a very enthusiastic vintage buyer. And I love local and independent business, so that's something that I'm really passionate about. Last fall, I launched the Shop Secondhand directory, which features over 3,000 vintage and secondhand shops and services across North America. It's a great resource for finding businesses, events, and services, especially right now in this time when you are looking for small businesses to support. So check it out, the link in my bio. Hello, Harper Vintage. You let me know in the comments if you want to pop in at any time. We're going to talk about tariffs in about 15, 20 minutes, I was just saying. So Harper Vintage, turns out, works in the tariff space right now. So that could be very handy for all of us. I'm also running the Vintage Sellers community, which Sarah is a part of, a membership for dealers focused on professional development and networking. If you are looking to connect with others, it's a great place to come and be. So if you're just joining us, feel free to say hi in the comments. Thank you so much, Harper Vintage. If you want to drop your name, then I'll call you by your name, but otherwise I'll just keep calling you Harper Vintage. So drop a phone emoji if you want to join in, and we are going to start with repair and reuse, talking a little bit about, like I said, the topic that we had planned to talk about before the tariffs kind of blew up on all of us. So starting on a lighter note. Before we get into repair and reuse though, Sarah, tell us more about you and what you're all about.
Yeah. It's so funny. I'm watching some auctions close. So if you see me like looking off to the into the middle distance, it's because I got some auctions closing. Hello everyone. I'm Sarah. It's funny when I hopped on here, I was like, oh, there will probably be a bunch of people who don't know me because I'm usually on vintage sellers community events. But I don't think we've done like a public platform thing like this together before. But I am lots of things. I'm a vintage seller. My shop is called Dwelling on the Past. I don't think you can see my shirt, but here it is. I'm wearing my branded shirt. I am based in Oshawa in Ontario. I sell vintage all across Canada. I do markets all over the GTA. I organize markets. I love this community, so I'm very passionate about it. I'm excited to talk about it. And in all the rest of my various gigs, I am an online content writer and creator. So I write blogs, social media content, I make reels, I do all sorts of stuff. So I live in this Instagram world all the time for all of my businesses, which is good and bad. We were talking about our screen time recently, which don't look at your screen time. Or do, but not, if you're going to do something about it, then look at it. But if you're not going to do anything about it, then it's just not worth knowing. So that is a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thanks for volunteering your time. So yes, this repair and reuse and talking a little bit about item condition and the language that we use as buyers and sellers. This came out of a voice note chat, as all good things do. And the reason that we're kind of talking about this today is that there's sort of like this overarching social media trend, talking a little bit about, hey, I don't think I would buy this. This item is damaged, that kind of thing. And it's coming from, buyers and sellers. So I wanted to get a temperature check from the people who are on the call. If you would buy something, or if you have bought something before that is damaged, and when I say damaged, it could be like a chip, it could be a scratch, it could be anything like that. Or if you really want that item to be like in pristine condition, if you feel like popping in the comments and letting us know, I'd love to just get a sense of like who's on the call and how you feel when you are shopping secondhand, if you're looking for that basically new with tags type of feeling, or if you're good with some use.
Yeah, what's the vibe before I launch into my own my own strong feelings on the matter?
Exactly. Yeah. So Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've seen?
Yeah. So, and I'll preface it by saying, like, I'm not referring to anyone in particular, and I really don't want anyone to feel like they've been called out. I think, like, what you purchase for your shop and what you resell and what the level of quality and condition that you look for in your own shop, that is totally fine. Like, that's not the issue I have a problem with. I think what I struggle with is, like, I've seen a lot of content, especially recently, that's like people who are thrifting, and they'll show an item and say, like, oh, I left this behind because it was damaged, would you have bought it? And it's like a piece of decor that has, like you said, like a chip or a scratch, or it's a book with a dust jacket that has like a tear in it or something. And like I said, like, everyone has their own quality standards when it comes to what they sell. I think my problem is that this type of content, like, encourages customers and people who are in the secondhand kind of space to think that, like, stuff they buy from dealers should be in like the most absolute pristine condition. And I just, like, I don't think it's realistic. And I think what you and I were talking about is like setting this unrealistic expectation that is working against what it is that we're trying to do with our businesses, and just having a negative impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I tend to agree. I think before we continue on that thread, I want to kind of back up a little bit and talk about item condition. Like, how do you, as a seller, identify the condition of an item that you're selling?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. Like, when I say damage, I don't mean broken, or although sometimes I do mean broken, and that's because I have a particular affinity for, like, I like to fix. I don't like things to go to waste. And especially when it's stuff I'm keeping for me, like, I will buy broken things and fix them because it makes me happy. And then when I look at it, I have this like sense of accomplishment. But I'm not saying, like, oh, we should sell like chip plates or damaged glassware, or like items that don't work as intended, like electronics that are meant to be working and aren't, like, obviously, like, display vintage radios are their own thing or whatever. But to me, like, when it's a decor piece that's going to be like on the wall or it's static on a shelf, it's like, who cares if it has a chip? And if I disclose that damage in my listing, or like I take photos and I describe the item and I price it accordingly, then, like, why should my customer care about that? Like, if they are seeing all that information and they're making that purchase, then we've all kind of agreed to the same thing. So, like, I don't know. I think, like, for me, and I think a lot of people probably agree with this, like, my house is not a museum. Like, I buy a lot of secondhand furniture that, like, already has dings along the feet, so that then later when I'm vacuuming, I'm like, I don't care. Like, that ding was already there, so it wasn't, like, and when the reason I buy secondhand, and a lot of people buy secondhand, is it's better for the planet, first of all. And also, like, it lets me own unique, cool stuff. And oftentimes that stuff has been around for 60 years. And so, of course, it has damage. It has had this whole life and this whole story before it made its way to me. So I think creating this content that like shows you leaving behind items because they have these little flaws that fall into this damage category is just like, it's shifting the mindset in the wrong direction. I think it's just reinforcing those kind of ideas people have about like secondhand clothing is gross or like all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Christine Fluffy Bunny in the comments says she likes to fix and refurbish. A. McMillan 13 pieces with character. It's part of why vintage is so beautiful.
Ashley, hi Ashley.
Hello. If you just joined us and you're looking for tariffs, we are getting to tariffs. We're just taking a little long way in so that we can talk a little bit about true vintage stuff first.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you on the call. If you are a seller, how you tend to identify an item's condition, and how you inform a buyer if an item is damaged.
Yeah.
So Sarah,
you
have something to show, right?
Yes, I do. Someone in the comments said, do I sell both furniture and decor? Yes, I do. All sorts of things. And my website is dwellingonthepast.ca, shameless plug, if you want to go have a look while we're chatting. So, yes, I wanted to do a show and tell because like I always disclose the condition of my listings on my website and on social media, like when I post on Instagram. And I really take the time to describe things as well as I can. And I will add photos and I'll say like see photo 4 or whatever for like what the thing that I'm talking about is. And what I want to show and tell are these Bearable Craft salt and pepper shakers. And you've seen a lot of these on my page. I sell a lot of Bearable Craft. I have a personal collection and I love this brand. Bearable Craft is a Quebec mid-century brand that made a lot of these wooden items. They're made out of maple. They're stained to look like teak. They were really, really popular in the 60s and 70s, and then they went out of business. And so the 70s was 50 years ago, unfortunately. Sorry to remind everyone of that. So every time I find pieces like this in the store, I get really excited because I'm like, this is from 60, 70 years ago, and here it is in like good condition. This set in particular was really gummy, like the finish was really sticky, which means that the finish is failing. And so when you pick them up off the shelf, like they were sticky and they felt gross, which I think is why they were still there probably. And also the salt shaker didn't have the rubber stopper. So I bought them because I don't care about all that, because I know I can fix those things. And because they're such classic pieces and I know they sell and I know my audience really loves these like beautiful, well-made, like vintage kitchen pieces. It's one of the things I specialize in. So I grabbed them anyway. It took a bunch of time and effort to get them looking nice again, and they're not perfect. And my listing will explain all these different things about the finish and the stopper and whatever. But, like when you get creative about things, like I took a cork off a champagne bottle. That sounds fancy, but it was New Year's. And I cut it to fit this thing, the salt shaker. So now it has a stopper again. So it's back to usable
Good
in the
as
kitchen.
new, I think. I think.
And when you think about the number of like entire shelves of stuff that gets swept off into a garbage can at the thrift store, and if you've never seen it happen with your own eyes, I will tell you I have, and it is very disheartening. It's like, it just makes me happy to like look at an item, see that it's not perfect, and know that I can get it back to like 95%, and the customer is going to end up with them in their home is going to feel really good. I'm really happy about that.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that little journey into a DIY repair. Just to answer a few questions that were coming through the chat, Suzanne Matsukawa, Sarah responded about she sells furniture and decor. I don't sell. I'm a publisher. I write about the buying and selling space in vintage, secondhand, and antiques. So thank you for that. Rusty Bourbon, using reclaimed vintage textiles in my garments. I try to make notice of significant damage and have disclosures on my website, but I also hold my breath awaiting for someone to do a chargeback for damage. It's true. Yeah, it's tough. And like, how can you communicate that to customers? Like, over communicate that to customers.
Yeah, and I do recognize that it's a lot easier for me with my standalone website to do that, and I have a no refund policy. Like, I'm very good. I've never had lost packages or anything, but obviously I would refund for like loss or breakage in transit. But I don't have a refund policy because my listings are so detailed and my photos are so detailed. So obviously it's different when you sell through platforms like Etsy, and I recognize that that is
Yeah.
challenging for people. So I think, and it's not. It's like, again, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, and I really don't want anyone to feel like called out by this conversation. Like, it's not about whether or not you purchase and sell things that are in this condition and need repairs. It's just, how are we just having this conversation more broadly with people? And like, why is it important to say, like, oh, I left this behind because it was broken? Like, I just think there's more interesting pieces of content that we can make when we're at the thrift store that don't skew negative in that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it does kind of play into the larger mindset that a consumer has about wanting the newest, nicest
Yeah.
thing, right? And even though it's secondhand, we're still sort of saying that a consumer should want that essentially brand new, when we're talking about it that way.
Yeah.
And, I think part of this whole movement towards secondhand is to try and get buyers to sort of divorce themselves from that mentality. It's like, these items are used, right? And I think a lot of people, even if you were to break something at home or chip it, a lot of people's first instinct would probably be to either donate it if it was in okay condition, or to
Yeah.
actually just throw it out rather than to repair it. So, like you said earlier, it's one thing to have the damage and then you have to disclose it. I mean, we're definitely not advocating for not disclosing it.
No, yeah, no. And we'll get more into that later, like what I do to disclose and how I price around that and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
like, I'm not like, ooh, let me trick
Yeah.
people into whatever. Like, it's not about that. It's about, like, I always try to position it as like, I have repaired this thing and I have gotten it back to a place where this is going to last you another like 10, 20 years, whatever, because I put the time and work into it. And that's what sets me apart as a vendor versus you going thrifting, you, the general you, going thrifting and buying this yourself, is that like, you may not know how to do that. I've spent a lot of years learning how to do these things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Fluffy Bunny, even after restoration, still not as new. I'm cool with that. I always note flaws so buyers are aware. That's
Yeah.
great. Rediscovered on Marsh. We talk to every buyer directly, especially if we've repaired a piece for sure. Kara sells a lot of furniture too, so that's definitely something that you want to know. April Faith, I try to avoid pieces that have chips or crack, but for crazing, it can't be helped. I always disclose any defects. Yeah, crazing, it'll come to you. Even if you have a new item. I had a newer dish and it crazed within like 2 years. So. It was in like the wrong humidity environment or something. I don't know. It's just not good.
She was not in her right element.
Yeah, sorry, I missed some of these, like what they were in reference to before, but heart-wrenching from Right Blush Home, leaning into heritage and quality. Yes, thank you. Thank you for those comments. I think for buyers anyway, I think being more open to repairs and flaws and stuff is just a kind of a part of shopping in this space. So obviously, of course, you can get fabulous, like new with tags, secondhand items all the time, and that's great, and you should do that if you can. But I think being open to the fact that these items were used, and making sure that there is that transparency from a seller, because 10 to 30% of what's donated to a thrift store actually ever makes it to the floor, and the rest get sent away to global markets, and it'll ultimately end up in landfill and not sell, right?
Or it goes right into the trash, and you can see that when you go to any thrift store. It is in the back of the store, and like it's the way it is. Like, people donate trash, so some of it is literal trash, but like, it's
Yeah. So for the people who are buyers on the call, if an item says it's damaged or needs repair, like what Sarah's describing, she's disclosed an item that has damage. Do you buy it? And if you do, or why? And if you don't, why? I'd love to know. Kara Rediscovered says it's important to flex your ability to fix things, or you finish to the point where people don't know. They're usually impressed. That's true.
It is really satisfying when like you refinish something to such a degree that, then you post the before and after on Instagram and
Yeah,
people are like, oh my God, how did you do that? And it's like, time, baby.
yeah, exactly.
Energy.
Um, if you're just joining us, we are getting to tariffs very soon. We're just going to finish up on our first topic here. So, I think what we're talking about is setting expectations, just with the way
Hmm.
that we are talking about condition and repair as a community, and what it can have, what impact it can have on the buyer, I think. What else did I have here? Some common repairs that are reasonably easy to do. Do you have any that are like, what would you say that buyers shouldn't count out if they see that something's, damaged?
Yeah. I think one of the things one of the notes I made for myself about this is it damaged or is it really dirty?
Mm.
Because sometimes it is damaged and sometimes it is gunk. And sometimes that gunk feels like it's not going to come off. And I've done this a few times. I've sold a couple of Le Creuset pieces that were trash, honestly, when I pick them up because the bottom gets singed. People don't know how to fix it. And they're like, my creuset is ruined. It isn't. If the bottom of your creuset is black, you can still cook in it, by the way. But like aesthetically, it doesn't look like what they want. They donate it to the thrift store. It ends up with me. I come with my little magic potions. I get it back to, looking great. And then I sell it. I'm happy. My buyer's happy because they've gotten a creuset at like a fraction of the price of buying, their $400 or $500 or however much they cost. So, like, that was me doing research and like testing some methods. And I have a Le Creuset pot, so I was able to test it on my own property before I like tested it on something I was going to give to someone else. But so to me, like I've done my job when I've like saved that item and kind of passed it on and I've learned a new technique. So I think like having sort of an arsenal of techniques that you can rely on and like things that you can kind of try. And that comes with time and like and repetition, but like and it's all household stuff. Like I don't like to use toxic things because they are going to someone else's house, and I don't know if they have sensitivities to things. They have kids, they have whatever. I don't know how they're going to use the item, so I want to assume that like this item is going to end up in someone's mouth. Maybe I don't know. It might, So I use like on these, I use salt and vinegar to clean them. It took forever, and you have to scrub, but salt and vinegar will get it. It'll remove old gunky finish. um, Baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, barkeeper's friend, which is oxalic acid, which is something that a lot of people have in their kitchens. Using like cutting board conditioner on wooden kitchen items because it's food safe. Using like beeswax and kind of more natural products on furniture when I can because it's not super toxic and it's not going to off gas in someone's house when they buy it from me and all those sorts of things. So like it's hard for me to say what are some reasonably easy repairs because I I think what I consider to be a reasonable repair, people would be like, what do you mean you're ordering new teak handles from a boat supply store and then using whatever, using power tools to like dig out the old handle, replace the handle, stain the handle, whatever. Most people would not do that, or maybe they would, but like just ask yourself when you're looking at something at the store, like, can I go on a journey with this item and figure out and learn along the way how to repair it? And like, it's DIY. Like, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you have tried something and you've made the thing look worse than it started out looking. But I don't know. I just like I don't know. I find it to be a really creative process when I'm trying to fix something. So I would just encourage people to like view it as a fun thing,
Give it a second look.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
involve your kids, like clean your brass with ketchup and get your kids in there. Like it's a family affair.
Fair. We are going to get into tariffs very shortly here. I just want to read a few more comments. As long as it's disclosed, I'd be fine with buying something. The seller gave that item more life by fixing it to a good point. That's great. April Faith, I don't fix because I don't know how to fix most items. Not a DIY person. Also fair. Like,
Yeah.
good fix. Lexi Lux, hi. It's funny. About to sit down and repair a jacket, put off sewing repairs. I mean, we all do. I put off my hand wash all the time too. Like, only wait till I have like 13 items, and then why wouldn't I do it for 4 hours? So, have you ever used the pink stuff, and does it work? Do you know what she's talking about? It.
I do know what you're talking about. No, I have not used it. It seems from what I've seen on social media to be like a miracle worker, but I've never used it. So maybe I should order some and test it out and report back.
Yeah, try it out.
Add it to my kit.
Yeah. Can I go on a journey with this item rediscovered like that? It's got to be a good piece with a big profit to invest a lot of time, says Rendigan Retro. Yes. I mean, if you're a seller, for sure. I think from a buyer perspective, it's, you know, if you can get it at a good discount or something, if it's at the thrift store, and that's something that you want to put the time into, then that works too. Sarah, did you have anything else you wanted to add on this one before we totally switch gears into something a lot more serious?
No, I know. I think people are itching for us to get into it. So yeah, I just I think I'll leave it at what Kara was saying, like, can I go on a journey with this item? And like, and it goes into like the profit margin piece of it. Like, you know, I know what an hour of my time is work because I bill hourly for a lot of the stuff that I do. So I ask myself, if I spend like 10, 20, 30 minutes working on this thing, I know my hourly rate, I know what my markup is going to be on the piece, I know how much I paid for it. Does that math all gel together in my head? And like, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't quite. But like I said, like, I really derive satisfaction from like reviving stuff, and like it really makes me feel this sense of achievement. So like for me, the balance is different than it will be for other sellers. But like, I'll tie it up by looping back to my original point, which is like, think carefully about what kind of customer education you're putting out into the world, because we are fighting against just a huge amount of information about secondhand stuff that skews negative. And so think whether what you're putting out there is supporting the community or if it's like confusing customers. I'll leave it at that.
No, that's a great point. And I think, you know, it's also just not only about what information is out there about the secondhand market, but also just going up against like fast fashion and all these other choices that a consumer has, and like, what do you want them to know about this space? So, okay, we're gonna get into tariffs. We're now at 8:30 my time, so it's time. You know, as most of you know, obviously the tariffs are on hold for 30 days, the ones between US, Canada, and Mexico anyways. Obviously, there's been a lot of uncertainty this past week. The uncertainty is continuing, of course. These tariffs may never end up happening if a more concrete deal is reached. They might end up happening if Canada and Mexico are unable to meet what's been set out already and meet the ever-moving goalposts. So this is not really the end. I think we can all expect that tensions are going to be remaining kind of high for a good while yet. So we're going to talk about that today too. We're going to talk about navigating this kind of limbo period that we're in as buyers and sellers. Sarah, as she mentioned off the top, is a seller. She has a website in Canada, shipping within Canada. So she's going to be bringing that perspective. And then I'm going to be turning to you in the comments as well, because I know there are vendors here with firsthand experience who can talk about what it's been like for them this past week with cross-border customers and shipping and all of that. If you're just joining us right now, I'm an indie media publisher and journalist, not an economist, but I used to cover the manufacturing space and importing and exporting during the first Trump administration. And I was doing that at the time that the new free trade agreement was signed. So not deep knowledge by any means, but decent enough. And, you know, because we're talking something that's a bit more political in scope, I just want to ask that everybody's respectful. You know, I think that there's a lot of frustration and fear right now amongst people. You are, of course, welcome to express your comments and questions and concerns in the comments, but just remain respectful of each other. And my moderator will remove anybody who's not being respectful. So I hope that everybody's eager to be thoughtful and discuss.
I hope it doesn't end up booting me out and get heated about this topic.
You get on a chair and then you're just gone. You know, if you already follow me, I think you know that my goal is to support businesses on both sides of the border. So I want to help vendors reach buyers. And we're going to look at some key scenarios and talk about the impacts that this is having in both countries and what it might mean for the secondhand market overall, and how to support businesses in our respective countries, but also across the border as well, because I know that people are keen to shop very small right now, and other people are keen to, you know, support each other across the border. So just for transparency, I live in Canada as well. I started my audience here in 2021. And I've made some strong and deep relationships with the vendors here, and a lot of them have been here since the beginning, including Sarah. Some of them are here tonight on the call. Thank you so much for the support. And I'm also grateful that my audience has reached America and that we have our American friends who are on this call. I have US members in my membership, and in launching the Shop Secondhand directory last year, I created a space to discover both Canadian-based and American-based vintage antiques and pre-loved shops and services online. So e-commerce, I think, is really the big peg in this discussion when it comes to secondhand, because it's made vintage buying and selling and collecting borderless, right? Like, it's important to recognize that when we're talking about the sector as a whole, we're not just talking about people with stores in cities or people at your markets. We're also talking about people who are running an Etsy shop, out of their house, or operating a Poshmark closet on the side, or, a full-time e-com seller. All those multiple marketplaces, or some people like Sarah have their own e-com websites. So the folks who are selling online are generally selling internationally, not every case, not in Sarah's case, but oftentimes, right? So this is really deeply affecting the online selling community, the threat of the tariffs. We don't have the tariffs, thankfully, right now, but this is something that's really of concern for a lot of people. So, and I know that there's people on the call tonight who do like live sales across the border as well, working with sellers in Canada and the US and tapping into each other's audiences. And I think that that's really cool. And that kind of stuff is in question under this whole cloud of tariffs, right? Like, it's not like it's going to stop, but it does mean that a customer is going to pause if a good costs more than it used to, right? So the ones that can pay will pay, because if you're a collector and you're collecting something specific, you are going to pay, but many won't. And I think that's kind of the concern that we're going to talk about tonight. So there's also a ton of knowledge on the call here. Sarah's here, but there's other vendors in the comments. So if you're a consumer or another vendor and you have questions as you go along, or comments or things to add, drop them below, and I'm sure that somebody will join in to answer you. Of course, you can also drop the little phone emoji and I'll call you up here. So I'm going to get into the background really quickly before we actually start discussing. Again, I just kind of want to recap what's been going on as it relates to the retail market in North America. I know that people are at various levels of awareness of what's been happening. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening right now. We're mostly going to be talking about US, Canada, Mexico today. China's got its own tariffs and retaliatory tariffs, but we're talking about North America today. So February 1st, 25% tariff was announced from the US on goods imported from Canada and Mexico. Right? There's been some confusion over the wording of that, whether it was, made in Canada products or all goods or whatever. It doesn't matter right now because it hasn't happened yet, right? Those tariffs would be applied on top of any tariffs or taxes that are already paid, right? Later that day, Canada responded by saying it was going to apply a 25% tariff on $30 billion worth of American goods, okay? That list included things that are relevant to this market, including clothing, jewelry, glassware, printed items, all kinds of things that are relevant to this space. So 3 weeks from now, there would have been more tariffs placed on another batch of goods as well, right? Provinces in Canada then started enacting their own measures that they were also going to be doing, right? So we had a free trade agreement in North America. We still do. It exempted a lot of these tariffs from being applied, right? Especially in this space, there were a lot of items that were able to cross the border without having to pay anything extra in terms of like import or export duties. So that free trade agreement was supposed to expire next year, meaning that what's happened this week is actually in violation of that agreement, right? So a key part of this, as it relates to vintage and secondhand, is what I just said, this exemption. It's called a de minimis exemption, and it allows shipments under $800 to come into the US tariff-free. Canada also has a de minimis threshold. Ours is lower. It's $150 for custom duties and $40 for taxes, and that's only by courier. If you are shipping via postal service, then it's 20 bucks. So there are a million rules. Some goods don't apply, but that's kind of like what's happening, right? So the freak out was that, the directive from the US said that it was going to close the loophole on this threshold, this $800 threshold on products of Canada, very vague language. And That immediately turned into every media outlet reporting that it was removing the threshold, but that's not exactly what they said. It was intentionally vague, I think. We do have some additional info now that China's tariffs have gone through. They did remove the threshold for products made in China, so that's gone. That tariff has to be paid on every single good that is made in China, right? Even if it's shipped from Canada. We'll come back to that one. So still uncertain about what's happening though if this were to go through from US and Canada, and that's kind of where things are standing right now. Everything is like a big I don't know. We can reasonably assume that it'll be kind of similar to this, but we don't know anything, right? So like I said earlier, temporary deal is in place now for 30 days. So that brings us to March 4th, 2025. So pausing the tariffs doesn't mean they're not happening. So if you're a vendor, then this next month is kind of like a grace period for you to start figuring out plans if you do sell into the US, or if you do sell into Canada if you're in the US. So it was a shock, and now it's like, okay, we got to think about next moves, right? And we will come back to that. If you're a buyer, this next month is a time for you to consider your options, right? Your values and where you want to put your dollar. And so I hope that what we're going to talk about is going to inspire you. And I just want to go back to look at what Lexilux said. I just don't understand how now we're supposed to investigate if any specific item is made in China. Sometimes it is so impossible. How could I possibly create a form on Stallion for that? Yes. So she is referring to Stallion Express, which is a courier service. And they've released some information about what sellers are supposed to do in order to declare that an item is made in China. I honestly, my feeling is that it's chaos right now, and that probably if you don't know, you don't know. And I don't know that they're going to be coming after a small shipment like this going across the border. They might be cracking down like ASAP, but if you don't know, that's the tricky part with vintage. Sometimes you truly do not know. Like you don't have a tag on a piece of clothing that says where it was from. There are some provisions in place. If you do have a garment and you can't identify what country of origin it's from, they will take a look at it, and if say it's silk, they'll pick the country that usually produces silk. Like they'll like assign it a country basically. So that may be something that you could do and sort of stand behind if you don't know that it's not from China. You could, assign it a different country based on like the makeup of the garments. So I don't know if that's helpful, Lexi, but I know it's frustrating and it's worrisome, right? It's scary. So just to also talk a little bit about tariffs in general and what they mean. I know, again, like I said, people on the call are at different levels of knowledge about what actually a tariff will do. So a tariff will hurt the importer that is in the destination country because they have to pay a fee, right? And they also tend to hurt the exporter, so from the originating country, because there are less imports because the price is higher, right? So generally people are like, why would anybody ever put in a tariff then if everybody is paying for this? And the reason is that the idea behind it is that it's to raise the prices domestically. So basically domestic manufacturers can't compete with lower cost imports. So Shein and Temu being an example, they've been a target of this whole China tariff thing. The manufacturers in the US can't compete with that, right? Because the labor in the US is higher, the cost of materials is higher. So if those imports that are coming in from China are more expensive, then in theory, people will buy more domestic products because they're just like, why would I buy this if I could get this, right? And we're kind of seeing that already happen a little bit in real time this past weekend, especially with like all of a sudden everybody's like, buy Canadian, buy American. Even without having those tariffs in place, people were already turning inwards and wanting to buy more domestically, right? So tariffs. Bank of Montreal has said that Canada, if they go through, Canada is facing a modest recession if the tariffs hang around for at least a year. Because the Canadian dollar is quite weak right now, the US businesses that import Canadian goods may actually not feel the pinch of that 25% tariff from Canada as much as the Canadian businesses. So that's a good thing. If you're a US business, you may actually still be okay, like once you do the math, depending on what it is that you are bringing in. You may, with the exchange rate, it may still work out for you to not have to completely rearrange your supply chain or your producers or wherever you're getting your wholesale deals from, for example. So on average, the 25% tariffs could cost Canadians is about $1,900 a year on an annual basis. And for US consumers, it's about $830. So those numbers exclude the de minimis exemption that we talked about earlier. But because our economies and our supply chains are so integrated, our manufacturing, tariffs would ultimately mean higher prices on both sides of the border, right? As well as layoffs and unemployment, particularly in some of the hardest hit areas like auto manufacturing and steel and forestry and stuff, because companies will literally stop doing as many projects. They'll slow them down, they'll halt them, they'll lay off people. And the Canadian Federation of Independent Business says that it would lead to 2/3 of small businesses increasing their prices for consumers to offset the impacts, right? So depending on the size of your business, you might be able to eat the cost a little bit, and depending if you're a very small business, like the ones that we usually talk about here on this call, chances are you can't, right? So for the resale sector, it would probably mean that some businesses are going to decide to close and some are going to decide if they're going to weather the storm, right? Depending on what their shakeout is of business that they do into Canada or into the US, right? It also means shipment delays. It means that there are likely going to be higher costs for wholesale clothing. So, if you're in the secondhand clothing space, oftentimes you're buying in bulk from a supplier, possibly across the border. Thrift stores are doing that too. They're moving stuff around all the time. Graders, those are the companies that sort the massive amounts of donated clothing. They do cross-border work. So anybody that does furniture importing, all of this stuff is going to be affected should they go through. So common question, and we will come back to Sarah in a second. I just want to really set the scene here.
I am so fascinated by the depth of your knowledge about this, so please keep going.
Okay, so who pays the tariff? If you were on the last call with me, we talked about tariffs. I had Sarah at Better Day Fits. I seem to like having people called Sarah on this call, but we talked about this. But I have some fresh examples, so it'll feel new to you. So there's conflicting information out there about who actually pays the tariff. So the tariff is a surcharge that's applied to a product when it enters a country, and it is the importer, meaning the business or the individual who is bringing that product into their country, who pays that money to the federal government. So the federal government being the Canada Border Services Agency in Canada or the US Customs and Border Protection in the US. So if I am a business owner in the United States who upcycles clothing and say the new tariffs come into place, and I'm ordering dead stock fabric from a business in Canada, and they are shipping it to me, I, as the US business, am the importer, and the business in Canada is the exporter. So I, as the importer, pay that 25% fabric, that 25% tariff onto the fabric for the US government. And then if I'm working with a customs agent or a broker or something, they might do it for me. And that works both ways. So if I'm in Canada and I'm ordering that fabric from the US, then I am paying the 25% tariff on that fabric to the Canadian government. So there's really two scenarios in terms of how that tariff actually appears on the final cost of the item. When you are the buyer and you're like, hey, the price is going up, how does this work out? So the first one is if you were a business and you were importing the good, like I just described. So I'm a business owner in the US. I just paid the extra 25% for my fabric. I'm running a really tight ship because I work in the secondhand space, right? Not a lot of extra money to go around. I can't absorb that cost. Maybe if I was the A word, the Amazon word, I could, but I'm a one-person business. I'm a two-person business, and I can't absorb that cost. So I need to make it up. Otherwise, I will lose profit. And profit is how I pay myself and put food on the table and all that. So I will need to raise my prices to my consumers in the US in order to cover that 25%. So if I import that fabric for 20, then I, as the business owner, paid that other company $20. So with a 25% tariff, I'm actually just paying a 5% or $5, tariff surcharge, right? Plus any import fees I had to pay on top of that, right? So it's important to note that in every case, it's not necessarily 25% more on the final cost of the item. So this is actually the cost of the good before it gets that retail price on it, right? So in some cases it will be, and we'll talk about that. But I think that really needs to kind of get put out there that we are not necessarily talking about a 25% across the board increase on every single product, right? So if I normally am selling my upcycled shirts using this dead stock fabric, I sell them for $100. That includes my labor, my creation, my time, all that stuff, my overhead. I'm now going to list that shirt for $105 because I'm trying to make up that $5, right? It's not 25% on the 100. It's not $125. It's $105. So if I decide that I can eat the cost a little bit, then maybe I'm going to list it for $103.99 or something. But in the end, the price is going to go up, right? If you were to use various materials that you imported to make that upcycled shirt, then you're paying tariffs on multiple things if you are getting them from multiple places, and the final price is also going to reflect that, right? So in the second case, and kind of the more likely case, if you are a person who shops on Etsy or shops on, eBay or wherever, if you are just the individual and you are buying directly from the seller, right? So if I'm just hopping on eBay or Etsy, this one does have the potential to hurt a lot more, right? Because as the buyer, as the collector, as the vintage lover, you are the importer, essentially. So basically, if I'm, in the US, I'm buying a vintage glass vase and it's from a Canadian seller originally manufactured in Quebec. The vendor presumably got that from somewhere, like an estate sale or something, and now they're going to sell it to me. And we don't have full confirmation on how this will work because, again, the tariffs are not in place. This is all theoretical at the moment. But basically what would happen is the vendor lists the vase on Etsy for, say, US $60. Say there is no de minimis exemption in place. In this case, the 25% tariff would likely then be applied for the buyer to pay on that sticker price. So Etsy would have a line item saying like the 25% tariff, right? So meaning on a $60 item, US, the tariff fee would be $15 plus tax, plus shipping. So it does start to add up, right? Like it starts to really add up. I'm gonna pause for a moment and ask, Lexi says, not sure if it's a dumb question, but what is the difference between a duty and a tariff when I bring in something via Shipsy, a third party, I still pay a duty fee? Love that Harper Vintage Decor is here, who works in the tariff space. For your purposes, there is no difference between a duty and tariff. They're both kinds of taxes. Yes, thank you so much for adding that. So another big question before we, discuss, how would the tariffs be collected? So big companies generally have like an electronic payment system that they are signed up with their respective federal government, and that tariff gets automatically deducted when they are importing goods into their country. So if you are an individual, you're the importer, right? So in this case of online marketplaces that collect these kinds of tariffs, Europe has something similar. It's called the VAT fee or the VAT fee. There are lines built right into their systems to charge the customer, who is the importer, that fee, right? And that's kind of what we expect is gonna happen, but we don't know until we get that like final documentation should they go through, right? But if you're not using something built in, like if you're just buying off Instagram, then your package will likely go through customs, and then you'll be sent like a bill in the mail or via text. So payment itself is pretty straightforward, but I think there's a lot of questions about like the amount of time that stuff is going to be held up in customs because they are going to be looking at stuff a lot more carefully now, and that will cause delays there. So yes, Harper, if I have anything wrong, if you want to fact check me, go ahead. Because I appreciate that your knowledge is here on the call. So. Okay, what does this mean for secondhand, right? And I think that's kind of a very, very broad background, but I feel like I was talking forever about that. So hopefully it gave some understanding about sort of the picture of what is going on here. I'm going to bring Sarah back here, and I would love to know from you, and while Sarah's talking, from the other vendors on the call, as somebody who's been running a business during this last few days, how have you just been feeling in general about the tariffs, about what's been happening in the space and the way that people are communicating in the space? Any feelings?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to check that you still hear me okay, because my internet has gone out.
Yeah.
So I'm on data, but as long as it still sounds good, then good. I will climb onto my soapbox because I wrote this down because I wanted to state this very clearly, because I'm so frustrated by this. Like this, exactly as you said, like these are vague threats that are designed to cause fear. That is a tool of tyranny, frankly. It is like so needlessly divisive. It creates this smoke screen that's masking like actually all this other sort of like policy change and reversal that's happening in the US right now that is affecting like millions of people who live there and millions of people who live across the world in, you know, every type of country. It distracts people from like actually important things that we could be working on, like homelessness, food insecurity in Canada, access to medical care in Canada, all those things. It has shifted our attention to this one little thing. And it is just, it's designed to, like you said, make people turn inward and exhaust them into being like complacent about the state of the world and exhaust them into like not caring that this is happening because it's so complicated. And most people are like, I can't fit all this information into my brain. I don't even know how to start tackling it. I'm just going to give up. And this is what causes, like you said, recessions. Businesses are going to close. Like people are going to lose their jobs. And why?
Yeah.
Why? So you know, I was thinking because it's Black History Month and I've seen this Martin Luther King quote a lot. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I do think that like eventually the morally correct side of this will prevail. Whether or not these tariffs come to pass is hard to say because, like you said, it just keeps getting booted kind of further down the line to keep people in this sort of like haze of unknowingness. And that's just, anyway, it really riles me up. So thank you for the opportunity to say that. I just like,
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
hard
and
to,
I think it's riled up a lot of people. It's riled up like national organizations on both sides of the border, the
yeah,
U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, you know, the Retail Council of Canada, Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, and you know, I'm assuming large companies are not too happy about this
yeah,
either. So
yeah,
it's like a monumental potential shift for
yeah,
how we do business in North America, right?
yeah,
Lexi freaked out. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
understandably. Lexi, how much, what percentage of your customer base is in the US? I'd love to know. We discovered on Marsh, someone reached out from the States to say they were wanting to buy from me and was apologetic for their current government. Reassuring. Yeah, fair. You know, I think I'd like to also know if anybody is on the call who has already noticed like an impact in their business. If you've noticed sales drop, or if you're a buyer, have you already started like changing the way that you buy? Have you started buying less, or are you really buying local? If you
Yeah.
want to let us know in the comments, it'd be great context with
Yeah,
us.
and Christina, keep reading the comments because I'm not. Oh, here we go. I wasn't seeing them for a while, but now they're back, so that's good. I know, like, so, like you mentioned, I don't sell cross border. I only sell in Canada, so
Mhm.
100% of my business is here. But I've seen other vendors, and Ash, who I don't think is on our call today because they are busy with this auction that I've had my
Yeah.
eye on this whole time. But I know they were talking about like how 60 to 70% of their business is in the US, which is a huge chunk of business. And so like I can imagine you know, it doesn't apply to me, but I can imagine that it's very frightening to have such a huge chunk of your customer base under threat. So
Mhm.
later in this discussion, I have like a lot of thoughts and kind of ideas on how people can mitigate that. But yeah, it's just like, why, why,
Yeah.
why,
Yeah.
why do this to businesses that have survived the freaking pandemic and the freaking recession that came after like, no,
Yeah.
anyway.
And in Canada, then we had a postal strike, and it's been a lot of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
looming too because it's not actually resolved. It just got booted to May, but
Yeah, that's
they
right. Yeah.
don't have
Oh
a
my God, I
collective,
forgot.
they don't have a CBA, so don't forget
Yeah.
about that.
That's coming back. Okay, I'm coming back up here to the comments. So, Whitebush Hillary, I sell a lot of vintage USA made glass, and I'm so curious about what they will do about USA made vintage items coming to the USA. I do have notes
Mm,
about that, so let me. It's probably best that I don't go out of order because I will lose my place, but we will come back to that.
yeah.
Lexi, I have a USA Poshmark, so that means I ship across the border solely there on that specific platform. I'd say quarter is US for me. Yeah, I mean, quarters, it's still 25% of your business, right? USA items coming from Canada, the US, yes. 92% of your business is US. Yeah. Heather at Blueberry Cove, Chit Chats is letting you put country of origin on your packages now. Should probably also include the dates because some vintage might be excluded. Thank you for that. That's a great tip. And Tabitha, Rusty Bourbon, definitely concerning in so many ways. 30% of my customers are from the state. Can only hope they continue to support us. Lost 1/3 of my customers is enough to close the order. Yes. So in that case, we're thinking of when we will talk a little bit about how to replace some of those people later. So clearly this is going to be more than an hour.
So yeah, buckle up, everybody. We're going into hour 2.
Well, we spent half an hour talking about
tariff
repair,
talk.
It's almost like I was putting off my tariff spiels. So I think I want to talk about China and what's happening with China just quickly, because I think we can use it as a marker of what might happen, right? So Lexi mentioned Stallion Express earlier, the courier. So they released a statement talking about how to manage sort of this 10% tariff that, well, it's 10 to 15% tariffs on stuff from China. So they took away that minimum exemption of $800 for anything with a country of origin of China, even if that item is shipped from Canada. So if you're Canadian, you do have to, and you're a seller, you do have to be abiding by this if you are shipping into the US and you are shipping an item that's made in China. So these items now require formal entry, they call it. So that means that they have to go through customs clearance and they're subjected to these duties and tariffs, and they're expecting delays with shipments. So this courier in particular is like featuring, I think Lexi mentioned it earlier, but a space for you to declare the country of origin and provide that information. So the reason that I want to talk about that is because if you are a US customer on the call, there's going to be a tariff if you are purchasing anything from China or China by way of another country. So from Canada, for instance. And again, because I think we can use this to sort of think about how the tariffs might work if they're extended to Canada and Mexico. So it's really messy with the lingo, and that's why we kind of have to wait for them, should the tariffs go through, to publish that it's called the harmonized tariff schedule. It's a big table about how much they charge per good and which categories they're charging for each thing, because there are some cases where you can argue that duty and tariffs may have already been paid once with secondhand goods, depending. So you may be able to get out of it. It's just like, it's a big mess, right? So I think I've got let me see my notes about what Hillary's question was. Yes, so the item about the USA stuff is if returning goods are made. So this was published on the Canada Border Services Agency before the reversal happened, before the pause happened. So returning goods that are made in the US and previously imported into Canada and paid duty. So for example, like in theory, that vase at some point came to you, White Blush Home, because it was already brought into Canada. It's a US made product. And it's considered returning to the US. And it's coming back from a shop in Canada, it would not have to pay that tariff. So if you can say that its original country is the USA, it would be exempted. Now, again, this was all before anything actually got finalized, but they did have that language published on the Canada Border Services Agency. And the page is still available. You can see it, it's archived. I guess it's not helpful for me to put it in the comments of this afterwards because you can't even click on it, but you can search for it. It's there. So what else did I have here? I have a million things. Sarah, did you have anything you want to add at this point while I check and see where we are in this chat?
I mean, yeah, lots, but I think I have a lot of kind of thoughts and suggestions about what we can be doing. So I don't know that I think we're still in tariff talk. I don't think we're in
tariff talk,
solution talk.
No, I think we are getting to solution talk here. So I think let's talk first about consumers, because there's still some on the call, and then we'll talk about vendors. But I think before we get into this, I just want to talk about the fact that we are talking about secondhand products here. We're talking about discretionary income that people have to make decisions about where they purchase stuff. This isn't about like where you should get your ketchup or like,
No. Yeah.
let's manufactured in Canada goods. This is vintage. This is used stuff. So the country of origin matters a lot less than it does for people who are making those decisions
Yeah.
about where they're buying new products. It's not, this isn't food, it's not liquor. Resellers have products from everywhere. And that kind of makes this space so special, but it also makes it really challenging to make sense of this stuff,
Yeah.
right? And another big thing is like when they publish all these policies, like secondhand stuff is often not like that language is not used. So you just have to kind of like figure it out and ask questions and all that kind of stuff. So, so if you just joined us since we introed this topic, we are sharing, being open, encouraging you to share as well if you want to. So, I think it's up to every consumer where they're going to get their products, but we talked a little bit about how our economies are intertwined. And I think what I wanted to note is just like as we turn inwards and we kind of have this buy Canadian, buy American mentality, things actually end up costing more, right? We talked about it. It raises the prices of domestic items, right? And I think that that's really important to think about as a consumer because we are in this sort of low-cost Shein world. So it's not just the cost of products with tariffs worked in, it's the cost of everything, right? It's if we're turning inward for everything, then infrastructure and development projects and big federal projects, all of that gets more expensive if we aren't outsourcing some of that stuff, right? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Like there's a lot of people who are really into like bringing stuff into your own country, but from a consumer perspective, and a taxpayer perspective, there tends to be this like real dissonance really about what we would believe that we should pay and what things actually cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these higher costs, because they haven't been realized yet, it's really hard to see the ripple effect of like being like, I'm going to buy absolutely everything from my own country. Because you can't visualize it yet. You don't know what that actually means, but it actually has like massive effects. There's a reason why we have this sort of interconnected system, right? There's a reason why free trade was introduced in what it was at the 70s or 80s. Now I don't know. So one thing that came up, I think this week, one thing like a trend that I saw of when people were talking about this is like, the government needs to help bail out businesses for this. We have to like get help. We need help to, if this is what's going to happen, like government needs to help us survive. And, we did that already with COVID-19 and a lot of people weren't happy about that, right? Like how much money was spent. So it would be the same, right? And I think that as consumers, we got used to something. We got used to really low cost. We got used to it being available right now, and it probably should cost more money to ship further because of environmental reasons, for planet reasons, right? And I think for consumers in Canada, it's really we're a little more used to duties and tariffs and all that because we have such a small population here. We get a lot of stuff from the US or from, the UK or whatever. We're used to like placing an order and being like, oh, I have to pay like $1 million extra for this in order to get it, right? But for the American consumer, I think it's a pretty relatively new thing. Like they have a lot of choice in their own country, right? So the one thing I also wanted to mention as well is like online shopping has changed. And I don't know if she's on the call, but Andrea at Ichiku Park sent me a video today with a news report interviewing a pundit who was talking about how these previous rules weren't really made for online shopping, right? So Shein and Temu have been taking advantage of this threshold that we've been talking about and shipping really like low cost packages into America, into Canada too, and not having to pay anything for it and just flooding our markets with all this junk fashion, right? And all these junk products. So, I think it would be great if there was a solution that involved multiple tiers where like maybe a small business of Sarah's size doesn't have to pay that tariff, but something like Shein has to pay lots, I think that there's maybe some more solutions that haven't been explored yet. So What I'd like to hear from you and people in the comments is just how you feel the tariffs are impacting buyer perceptions of value in secondhand market. Like if you feel like it's already happening, or do you think that customers will feel like because the prices are going up, therefore I'm not going to get secondhand because it's too expensive? Like, what do you think? What do you anticipate happening if the tariffs were to go through?
Yeah, I think it's just like it's slapping another layer onto like what's already been happening economically for the last like 6 to 12 months, probably longer. But like it is like a tough economy in Canada right now. Like the food prices are high. People are really deprioritizing like luxury purchases, and by luxury I mean stuff you don't immediately need to live, like food and heat and whatever. Like the stuff I sell in my shop are not essentials for anyone, and I know that. And so it's already been kind of a tough like selling economy for the last few months. And I know I'm certainly not alone in feeling that way. I'm sure every vendor who's in this call right now can relate to that. And I think just the perceived, and that's what I meant too earlier about like the perceived threat. Like it hasn't even happened yet, and people are already like, I got to put every single dollar I have right into the bank and like forget I'm not spending anything. I'm not going on vacations. I'm not eating at restaurants. I'm not doing anything. I got to keep my money under my mattress and whatever. And it's like, it's not happening yet, first of all. And second of all, like doing that just exacerbates the issue.
Mm-hmm.
It just it propels it into this thing, and it just turns into this like big snowball effect. So I think we're like, whether or not they come to pass, even I think we're seeing the results of it. And it's frustrating because I think we kind of saw this during the pandemic too. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, let's support our local sellers and our local businesses and like buy local, and like if you don't shop local, then goodbye local and all those things. And then that very sort of relatively quickly shifted into like, why are local things so expensive, and no thank you, and off I
Yeah.
go to wherever, to
Yeah.
get the best bang for my buck. So it's like you were saying, like that that feeling like everything should be super inexpensive is so pernicious, and like we're so disconnected from how things are made that like we think that eggs should cost $1.75 for a dozen or whatever, which like is
Mm-hmm.
nuts. They also shouldn't cost $15,
Yeah,
but
I was
like
gonna
there's a
say like
happy
eighteen
medium in
ninety nine or
there.
whatever the price is.
There's a happy medium in there where everybody who's involved in me eating an egg for breakfast is making like a living wage.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's I think it's hard, and the uncertainty just causes people to
Mm-hmm.
panic a little bit. I think that's what we're seeing, is like a little bit of just people are really gun shy about making any sort of purchases, commitments. They're
Yeah.
de-enrolling from all their streaming services and
Yeah.
everything. It's like, where can I save $22? Like
Yeah.
where can
Yeah.
I, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way. I think it's like you talk about a recession and suddenly there is a recession. So it's like white blush. I have a lot of USA buyers reaching out, but I will say I'm heavy USA items, so I'm hoping I'll be in the clear, which sounds naive. I don't think it's naive. I think it's likely that I think that that's probably what will happen should it go through. But the best you can do is just tell them what you know, and that's all you can do right now. And it's good that they're reaching out though and asking and not just like ghosting altogether.
Mhm.
So, makes me think about how much I don't buy Canadian made. Yeah, it's hard. It's harder to buy Canadian made for sure if you don't know where to look, especially. Think the stigma of the resellers buying items from the thrift store and reselling them for higher prices, and we'll add a layer with the tariff being added. Absolutely, yeah. I think that seeing all those line items add up on an Etsy shop is going to be of concern for people,
Yeah.
and not help matters in terms of the narrative there. Lux cost of living has simply skyrocketed across the board. I think somewhat unfortunately for what we do, it's not essential. Therefore, getting it cheap and deal and bargain is usually top of mind for people. Yeah, if the cost of living increases greatly. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with all of this. I do feel like the onus is also on the consumer to start shifting the way that they think about how they consume as well. And
Yeah.
that's like a huge side conversation. But, you know, affordability is like a really slippery slope. Like when, you know, if you're I buy Shein because it's what I can afford, but you buy, you know, 15 pieces of Shein a year at like $8 a pop, and like you've thrown them all out by the next year,
Totally.
and you could have just bought one item that was good quality, you know, and that's part of like the way that we've been sold to as consumers about how much we need and all of this stuff about how much should be in our closets and like feeling like we need to keep up. So it's like a huge sociological thing in the background, but it's tricky, right? And I get that it's difficult to make those decisions as a consumer, but this is also the time to like reevaluate the way that you
Yeah.
spend, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So um, let's see here. I'd love to know if anybody on the call has ever been surprised by a duty or fee when buying or selling vintage items internationally. I had a consumer reach out to me the other day, actually, who had bought something from a seller in the U.S. and she was just curious about if the duty she paid, there was a discrepancy between two orders, and she was just curious if I thought it was because the tariffs weren't in place yet. But basically, point being is that, like, you know, sometimes buyers are surprised when they get to that
Yeah.
final step. So, you know, there's sort of two thoughts of mind when it comes to actually this coming through. If this actually comes down the pipe, like, how are you gonna do you explain it to a customer, or do you rely on the customer to know that information themselves, right? Like, it's the customer's responsibility to pay that tariff, so the customer needs to, or do you try and communicate as the seller to be like, hey, this is what I'm doing to like mitigate pricing on my end, or whatever conversation you want to have, if you're trying to sort of attract people who might not otherwise buy
Yeah.
from you.
Yeah. And that's tricky. Like, you know, I think I would never want to mislead or like lie by omission or whatever, like a customer. And also, when you think about that, like if a customer orders from you and you don't kind of talk about the fact that these extra fees might be applied, and then they get dinged with that at, you know, they get a bill for $43 on something that
Mm-hmm.
costs $100 or whatever, as recently happened to me. um they will buy from you once and never
Yeah.
again, because they'll be like, well, damn it. Whereas I think if you have a more transparent conversation with people, in so much as you can, because they're so shrouded in mystery, and, you know, like, we're here trying to unravel all these threads of how it's going to unfold and what it's going to look like and what the actual amounts are going to be and all those things. And like, I think it's okay to say, I don't know, but
Yes.
know that there will be some fees and I'm trying to figure it out on my end. But like, and just making people aware of that, I think people appreciate that, and they're much more likely to come back to you later. And maybe that later is like after these tariffs are no longer in place, but at least like you've built that relationship with customers, that they're not like, ah, I got hit by this surprise fee and I had no
Yeah.
warning. I think it's the warning piece that people are really get hung up on.
Yeah, yeah, great point. White Blush, UPS will add a broker and always duty. With USPS, I never have to pay a broker or a duty yet because they do it themselves, right? Yeah, coming into Canada. So Harper Vintage Decor, important to note there are already US duties, yes, on certain goods already, namely softwood lumber products, steel and aluminum. Yes, more in the construction sector for sure, but you're right. I mean, we talk about tariffs, and you know, I think with this space especially, kind of the stress has been the fact that most stuff that moves across the border in this space tends to be under the $800 de minimis for coming into the U.S., and the 150 for Canada. So where to shop? So we talked about buy local movement, how it's been kind of gaining some steam, and I'll come back to that in a sec. But I think, you know, if you are somebody who wants to shop locally or within your own country, you want to consider supporting your local bricks and mortar stores, of course, your markets, your antique shows, but also your local online
Hmm.
businesses. And I shared something. I think it was Funky Vintiques. I forget. It's in my Tariffs highlight on my page. But she demonstrated that you can go onto eBay and you can search by country. If you don't know that already, you can do the same thing on Etsy. If you are keen to shop within Canada or keen to shop within the US, you can filter that stuff out. If you have tips on where to shop, you can drop them in the comments. If you're looking to identify vendors of vintage, pre-loved, and antiques in Canada, the US, you can also try the Shop Secondhand directory, which is one of my websites at the link in my bio. There are filters there with ships to Canada and ships to the US. The shop needs to have activated those filters, but it'll help you a little bit to sort of narrow down. You can also search by location, which is probably easier. So I think I've kind of made it clear I'm not really into the blanket boycott thing. I think it's going to be some people's approach, but I'm definitely a big believer in kind of better together, and small businesses against each other isn't really ideal to me. So
Agreed.
if you decide that you can't financially support a business, you used to support because of either monetary reasons, because those tariffs come through, or because of ethics or whatever, or what have you, maybe you really are trying to stick within your own country, there are other ways to support those sellers that you might have once supported before. You could signal boost them or refer them to a friend in their country, or share on your social media page, or that kind of thing. So solutions for vendors. I want to get into it because I know it's getting late. Sarah, you have some thoughts on mitigating some of this, the downturn that we're seeing already, only a few days in. Maybe you could share.
Yeah, I do, and I'm excited to share my perspective, and I'm excited to hear in the comments like what other people are thinking about this. And again, recognizing that like I only sell in Canada, and so like I I don't want it to come off as naive, the kind of information that I'm going to share. But anyway, everybody just share what you think. But I think like what we talk a lot in the vintage sellers community is like building our local networks together and growing our local communities together. And I think that is what is going to become the key to getting through to the other side of this. And like not 100% of your customers are going to live down the street or in your neighborhood or whatever, but I think if you start from 0 customers who currently live near you, and you can grow that to 5%, 10%, like that's already shifting your audience away from this sort of hyper dependence on other markets, and that can help you if you are in this situation. So, what are my tips? Doing local outreach, which might mean like joining local buy and sell groups, or collector groups and listing there. Running like super targeted ads for, if you have a vintage booth, you can run a super targeted ad for like the area where your vintage booth is, to target people who live near there and are likely to go there. Looking for ways to join forces with other sellers, like put on exciting events that you can market locally. And that doesn't necessarily mean like putting on a vintage market. Like you could get together with some clothing vendors and like get a seamstress or a tailor to come in and run like a drop-in mending night, or a drop-in like shop and get your thing tailored or hemmed or whatever on the spot as your shopping type of thing. um and let people know like they can bring in something and do a basic repair, like fix a button or whatever, for a fee. And that, it's marketing. That event is not going to generate a ton of income probably, but it's going to generate all the sort of community connections that like pay off in the long run. And as we all know, and we talk about a lot, it is a long game. It is the longest marathon of all time to be in this business. It's not a sprint. You could like set up at a local business or cafe for a few hours to like sell and meet people. I did that last year with Courage Cookies in Toronto, which was great for me because I just ate cookies all day. And it was a really good day, and I didn't sell a ton, but I met tons of people, and I handed out my card, and people followed me on Instagram, and people shopped on my website. So like I didn't leave with more money in my pocket necessarily, but it paid off in the long run. So like thinking about things like that, and also realizing that that does not come naturally to people. Like I think there's a reason why a lot of us, and me especially, sell online and are behind our computers and kind of do this as a solo, lonely occupation. But that behavior is not going to like lead to success right now. And so I know that, and I recognize that. And so pushing past this sort of like discomfort with getting out there, is I think what we need to do, and it can look different for different people, obviously. But
Yeah.
and also, like, if you do want to hunker down at home and just ship your stuff from home and not talk to anyone and not do any of the stuff I talked about, like, optimize your website. Like, people are like Googling right now, they're like, where can I shop locally for X product, or like, who in my area sells blah, and they're looking up local vendors on Instagram and TikTok and all those different places. So like, optimize your website SEO, make sure you're like mentioning your location, where you ship, how you ship, where you're located, pickups, all those things. Like, make it so obvious that it is not possible for anyone to miss that, and it's not possible for Google to miss it when they're scraping your website. Geotag your social posts. Oh, add your general location to your bio. Here we go. I'm climbing back onto my soapbox to say, if I go onto your bio and it doesn't say where you are, I hate it. Don't
Mine
do
doesn't
that.
say, but
But
I'm
you're not a
international.
seller. I don't need to know where you are. You're everywhere all at once. But like, if you are a person who sells things and I see something cool on your stories and I go on your profile because I want to know generally where you are and can I buy that cool thing and swing by and pick it up, or is it shipping? Like, just put where you are. I
Yeah.
have such a
Especially right now because people are looking.
yeah.
Yeah.
So put your location on your bio, put your location in your post, put your location everywhere. And then the last tip I have for now is to like tap in the power of UGC, user generated content, and just Google user generated content if you don't know what that is. But basically, it's like, I go to a coffee shop and I drink my coffee and I take a photo or I do a video of the coffee shop and I post it and I tag them as a collaborator, and then they post it on their page, and then all of their followers see it, and there's kind of some I was gonna say synergy, but that's because I friggin' work in a corporate environment all day. But there's some alignment there
Yeah.
between the two. And like, so with things like that, like, it doesn't cost me anything if I'm having a genuinely nice experience somewhere. It doesn't cost me anything to like do a little bit of content, post it. It doesn't have to be some whole big fancy thing, and like tap into their audience in that way. And it opens you up to their audience, and that audience might be small, but they are local to you. And local is more valuable than lots of people,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are great tips. Thank you for sharing them. You know, when Sarah was talking about SEO, like using keywords, I mean, you can use keyword planner and all kinds. You can ask ChatGPT if you want. You can do all kinds of things to find proper keywords. But even if you're able to say like things like local shopping in Toronto, or thinking about the way that people would Google something when they're looking for these,
Yeah.
and like having that actual phrase kicking around on your website in a couple of places.
Yeah.
That's helpful. I mean, I think with advertising and promotion, like, you can't necessarily rely on the traffic coming through your Etsy marketplace if the tariffs go through. Obviously, you know, a lot of sellers rely on it right now, and it's great for them. But you know, if you have 95% of your customers coming from the US, or 70%, or whatever the number is, try to talk to them beyond Etsy. Like, how can you tell them why they should want to pay $3, $5, $6, $7 more for an item, or whatever that raised price ends up being? You know, if you're going to raise your prices, like, you may end up just, we were talking a little bit earlier on a different call about like adjusting your prices to make up for the tariff, basically to help the consumer. So like dropping your price in order for the consumer to feel like they're getting it for the same price. Not necessarily like the most advisable, but it was a topic that came up. But like, why should they want to pay that tariff fee for your shop instead of just turning to somebody in their own country and finding the same thing, right? You know, maybe if you're a Canadian seller, like I said earlier, like, I don't know, an hour ago now, you know, maybe with the exchange rate, like, your price is still more competitive than other shops that are in the US, right? For an American buyer. Maybe you offer the best selection, or you offer the best service, or you have the best collection, or whatever it is that you decide. This is kind of like a time for you to tell your story and like get people to come behind you.
Yeah, totally. And that's it. It's like, lean into the power of storytelling. Like, everyone who is in this business is unique and does it for unique reasons and has a unique product mix. Like, there are no two vendors who are like out here doing the exact same thing for the exact same reason, in my opinion. So like, tap into that. Like, what makes you Interesting. And like we talked about that with some sellers recently, and someone was like, "Well, I don't know, nothing, I don't really stand out. Like I don't know what sets me apart from others." It's like, well, just because you don't know it doesn't mean there isn't something. It's just that you don't know it yet. So like spend some time working on that. But like that's, like the that's what people want in the end. Like when you're purchasing something, like you're buying that story and you're buying that experience. And so keeping that top of mind when you are communicating to people, especially now when like people are so sort of galvanized, like shop local and support their
Hmm.
communities and
Hmm.
stuff like that. Like now is a really good time to establish yourself as like, okay, I am a member of this community and here's what it is that I do that is different and is helping and all those things.
Yeah. Well, and it loops back to what you were saying when we were talking about the very first topic, repair and reuse, and kind of the message that we want to put out there, like talking about this buy Canadian, buy American thing, support this, don't support
Hmm.
that. I think I said it earlier, I'm a big fan of buying local. Like I buy everything almost local. I'm supporting my local vintage businesses and independent sellers, but local to me can also mean local in my city, it can mean local in my region, it can mean my province, I'm in Canada, or it can mean in my country, but it can also mean my continent. And as long as I'm supporting a small business, because that's my value
Yeah.
as a consumer, I want to try to support small businesses, right? So talking about it in a way that makes sense for your shop and your customer base. If you only sell Canadians, then maybe you're going to lean into buy local because that makes sense for you, right? But what if you are a vendor and 30% of your customers are from the US or even less, like say it's 10%, like it could be one person. Like, what if I'm one of your US customers and I see a post on your page that's like buy Canadian only?
Yeah.
So yeah, like why would I support you then? Just because there's a tariff does not mean we need to literally abide by it and only buy local within 100 kilometers.
Yeah.
And I think in an ideal world, we would, because we would be helping the planet to do that and,
Yeah.
making everything very farm to table kind of thing. We'd save a lot of carbon, but that's not our global world. That's not how consumers are used to buying. That's not, we've gotten used to getting stuff from elsewhere. And vendors in this space, the people who are my primary concern, are relying on this as part of their business, right? Like international
Hmm.
business and trade, if they're playing in e-commerce, has been part of how they make their income. So, I think that's just a really important thing to think about is like, what message do you want to send out there to your customers right now? And if it
Yeah.
is buy local, this is the only thing I only ever sell to Canadians, I only ever sell to Americans, I'm going to really lean into this, then go ahead and do
Yeah.
that. Then that's great if it makes sense for you. But don't try not to alienate people if you have people to alienate, basically.
No, that's it. It's like think about your messaging and think about, is it useful for me to say this out loud right now? I think it's just like sometimes that's just the key. It's like, does it help? Exactly. Does it help someone scrolling past my page to see that I posted this, or that I posted this 6 months ago, and they're browsing
Yeah,
and they're looking at stuff, and like it's just, yeah, it's
yeah,
it's it's not it's I really like what you said about like my community can be this continent that we live in, and like we have so many great like vintage sellers who are in the US who are part of the VSC who like are awesome people, and they don't deserve to be alienated from this conversation just because they're in a different country than we are. Like that is so not, and that's what I mean, like this sows unnecessary division and I don't
yeah,
like it. Like it's, we
yeah.
don't
It's
need
true.
to do this, and it's just, yeah,
Yeah, we
it's
don't
yeah.
need to do it. I
Yeah.
agree. White blush, I think it's separation of emotions and business is key going forward. Yes, it should always be, but I always say like business isn't personal, but it is. I mean, like when you are, especially when you are a business owner, like in a very small business, a solo business, like most of these vintage sellers are, everything that you put into your whole life is your business, right? So it
Yeah.
is always personal. But I totally agree with that. It has to be decisions about what is going to best serve my customer right now. I know I have, talking about buying cross border, I've bought stuff from the US and before tariffs and almost died at the custom fees. Like
Yeah.
it's happened. But I still felt good because I made a purchase at a small
Yeah.
business. Like, I bought a dress from Lovesick Plus in Chicago, and like I'm a shopper who has special requirements when it comes to like buying clothing. I'm a certain size. So, if that's you and you have certain requirements, then suddenly if you can justify the cost to yourself, it will suddenly become less of a priority for you if you are able to find the thing that you are looking for, the thing that you need. So there's always going to be shoppers like that out there. It's not like everybody's going to just like shut down and be like, I'm never buying anything ever again, right? So finding ways to talk about that kind of stuff to your customers. We're in this together locally, regionally, internationally, all that stuff. Another thing you could do is partner with, if you do wholesale and you are shipping cross border and you are really concerned, starting to look, yes, within your own country about who's doing wholesale, who is, how can you reduce some of your dependency on getting like stuff across the border right now for the short term, maybe because, you know, I mean, buying wholesale is a much bigger purchase than shipping a small package across the border. So, you know, making a list and calling around and see who's there, talking to customers, talking a little bit about pricing, just like we talked about earlier, like getting out more locally. These are all ways that you can close the gap, I guess, close the info gap. If anybody has anything else they want to share before we wrap up in terms of things that you can do, you know, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
All right.
And if you're watching the replay, put them in the comments.
If you're watching the replay for 90 minutes, then congratulations for making it this far. And
yeah,
thank you to anybody who's still here who was here at the beginning.
DM us because you are eligible for compensation. Yeah.
Compensation being hugs. Just like asterisk. Yeah. Yes, I think, you know, if you are on the call still and you are a vendor and you haven't, if you haven't listed on the Shop Secondhand directory, do that. It's free. It's let more people find you. You know, people are using it. You can have a physical space. You can be an online only business in Canada or the US. You can use that as a tool. Like people are using it to find information. So you may as well be on there, right? Thank you. Yeah, we should have done a 3-part series. I sent Sarah the outline earlier and I was like, this is a 10-part podcast. And really we should have just broken out the other topic, but you know, I asked Sarah to come on here for that reason. I wasn't going to be like, delete. So we've got to talk about that. So thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to everyone who's been here, popped in, stuck around, all those things. Yeah. We really appreciate you, and I really appreciate you. And yeah, just know, like, everyone is finding it hard, and it's not just you, and it's hard to keep your head up and be hopeful about things, and Lord knows I feel that way, but like, we're okay. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah. It's a challenging season, but I think there's compassion on the buyer-seller spectrum, I think, and everybody's making tough decisions. And you know, it's scary, but that's okay. We'll get through it. And March 4th, we'll hopefully have some more information. So if you found this combo helpful, follow us. Buyer-seller hotline is happening once a month this year. So if you have topics you want us to tackle next, just drop it in the comments on the recording, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.